Okay.
No.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, how do I go up?
Yeah, it's just yeah, either that way or that way.
Just go, can you just get on?
Yep, sure.
Okay, so I am now live and the camera's there, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so folks, to all of you, thousands of people who are, if not present electronically or in bodies right now, then will be down the track because this will be watched many, many times over, I would hope. I want to talk to you, this is the plan of the next hour. Is it an hour? It's an hour, isn't it? I want to talk to you about Vita. I want to talk to you about where the idea of Vita came from and some core concepts to help you get your head around the idea. And I want to talk about the 5 themes. So Vita is a spiritual philosophy, and there are 5 core themes that sit at the heart of its spiritual philosophy.
I've just had some comments about the sound.
Switched on?
No, that should be fine. Can everyone just try this?
Andrew, can you keep track of the times? Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, how's that working? Yes, sound is poor. Yes, how's the sound? Is it better now?
Can anyone just chuck in the comments to let us know if you can hear better? We are talking. Can you hear us? Can anyone hear us now? We're having a few difficulties.
We can hear you. It's quite loud, but it's kind of muffled.
Okay, thank you. We'll try and fix that.
Muffled.
Seems to be just that one microphone. However your voice was coming through before is completely different to the voice that's coming through off that mic that's pinned to
me.
Right, so should we use that mic?
Yes.
So if I use this mic, is that better?
Well, it's a little bit better, that's for sure.
Okay, suitable to proceed?
Yeah, let's get going.
Okay, let's get going. Good work. Right, now, so this is the plan. We're going to describe the 5 themes. Close that down. And then we'll have our audience, we'll ask them to make their comments on the themes, and then we'll discuss that, and then we'll talk about Vita's response to the core themes. We'll have a discussion, and then we'll close. So let me get underway straight away. Okay, so important notes to begin. Vita is a non-theistic spiritual philosophy, which is to say it is a spiritual philosophy that doesn't ascribe a role for God or the idea of God. This is not an absolute truth, but a way of viewing spirituality in the light of the climate and ecological crisis. It's new and evolving rapidly, and so your feedback, ideas, and constructive criticism is welcomed. First concept that I want to share is an idea called the long future. Now, the long future is this idea that our planet will be habitable for life for some several billions of years or so. beyond which time our sun will run out of gas, basically, and will expand into what's known as a red giant. Sometime in the next 1 to 4 billion years, this will happen. And when that happens, life on Earth will simply cease to exist. What that tells us is that we've potentially got hundreds of millions of years ahead of us, the habitability of the planet suitable for the humans, if only we don't destroy the biosphere in the meantime. Now, conceivably, yeah.
Sorry.
Go quick. Okay. So one of the concepts I want to put forward to you is this idea of the Verdant Age. Now, the diagram on the left is a bit complicated. I don't have time to go through it in detail, except to say that it comes out of a science paper called Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene. And what it's basically saying is that we are on a trajectory to what's called the hothouse, which is a rerun of the Permian extinction. Whereas if we don't rein back in our fossil fuel emissions, that we could potentially trigger a cascade of climate tipping points, which would effectively lead to the mass extinction of most life on Earth. The alternative to that is to draw down 1 trillion tons of carbon and euthanize the fossil fuel industry by mid-century in order that we can stabilize the planet and then become wise stewards of the whole Earth system and create what we refer to in Veda as the Verdant Age, which is a time when humans and the living planets of Earth operate in synergy. Conceivably, then, the Verdant Age can go on for tens or hundreds of millions of years because that's how much longer we've got for life on Earth. In order to get to the Verdant Age, we've got to get through the Anthropocene crisis. Another concept I want you to consider is this idea of Vita Planeta. Vita Planeta is basically another version of Gaia. Gaia is a scientific theory that says that the living organisms on Earth behave in the manner of a single living organism, behave in the manner of. So what Veda has done is adapted that statement a little bit to turn it into an article of spiritual belief, which is that all living things on Earth form part of a single organism. They actually are a single organism. This is not scientifically provable. It is an article of belief. But when one believes that, it helps to reframe our relationships to nature and to each other, because we start to see ourselves as cells in a body and having a mutual responsibility to look after the well-being of the host. So it changes the way that we see the world. When you see the world through the lens of Vita Planeta, there's no way to throw your waste to, because you're effectively throwing it into another part of yourself. And when you frame your views around Vita Planeta, the idea of pollution is basically polluting the environment. There is no environment. It's all part of this totality. So it's a shift in thinking. Now, in order for people to come on board this way of thinking, we have a concept called ecophany. And ecophany is an ecological epiphany, a spiritual, emotional, or intellectual awakening to nature. And most people who are environmentalists can point to a certain moment in time when they shifted their thinking and their heart shifted with respect to nature. For me personally, this happened when I was in my 20s working in the oil industry, offshore oil industry, particularly around Taiwan. And there was one day in particular where I was standing on the bow of an oil ship looking down at all the plastic bags drifting past, and it really shook me up. It was something I realized then, that there was a fundamental flaw in the relationship between humans and the living planet. The idea of Vita or a Vitan, somebody who has the characteristics of a Vitan, there are 3 characteristics of someone who we refer to as Vitan. So this is somebody who has a deep passion for nature, somebody who is spiritual but not religious, and somebody who has a science and reality-based view of the world. So if you hold those characteristics, or if one holds those characteristics, that is what we refer to as a Vitan. And there are, we believe there to be around 53 million latent Vitans, which is people that hold those views, but who have not yet come across the brand and this idea and this particular way of seeing the world. The 53 million latent Vitans is around a quarter of the cultural creative people. So this is a framework that sees Western people having 3 different psychographic characteristics, one of which is called moderns, that make up about 55% of the public and who, broadly speaking, don't see there to be any problems in the world. And then you've got 35% are the cultural creatives who are actively involved in trying to make the world a better place. So a quarter of the cultural creatives. And the third category in that model they're called conservatives, that make up about 15% of the public, who are sort of harking back to earlier times. So 53 million people, that's around 1.2 million people in Australia, would probably identify with this model if it were put before them in a compelling manner. Translation is a term that we use to describe the manner in which what we feel spiritually translates into the material world through our actions and inactions. So, for example, if somebody has a spiritual worldview, then, a Christian spiritual worldview, then there are certain things that they will do because of this translation. And this is really important because it shows a pathway by which spirituality can be used as a tool. And I know that's a hard phrase to use, that we use spirituality as a tool, but spirituality can be seen as a means, if you like, or a mechanism by which we can start to foster pro-environmental behavioral change by fostering spirituality change. And that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do with Vita. This is grounded in the Vita hypothesis, which is some work that I conducted last year through a Master of Business, a research project into this space, stack of science papers on spirituality and trying to understand how spirituality drives behavior. There was some work by a fellow called Orams, who did research on the interactions between people and the dolphins that come into Tangalooma Island. And what he found was that when they just have a spiritual experience, this amazing connection with nature, that didn't fundamentally change behavior. But when there was an environmental education program associated with this spiritual uplifting experience, hanging around with the dolphins, that was actually effective at creating behavioral change in these people. So we're trying to draw on that idea. The problem, of course, in terms of trying to spiritually awaken people to nature and foster pro-environmental behavioral change using dolphins, is that there just isn't that many dolphins. And so what we're looking at doing is creating programs called Awakenings, which can be delivered either in person or over the internet. And the Awakenings are programs that combine a spiritual enlightenment to nature with environmental education to try and frame for people a pathway of taking action that helps to avoid the crisis coming down the pipeline. We've got 4 Awakenings planned at the moment, and we've made a bit of progress on a few of them. So the bottom left one is called Plankton Meditation. This is a series of guided meditations, which you can either see just by watching them on the YouTube, or what we're planning on doing is to have people come into an auditorium where we'll project the vision onto the ceiling, and then people will experience the meditation laying on their back, looking up in a prone and comfortable position. And the Plankton Meditation, we've got one up. So if you Google Plankton Meditation, you can watch it. And it's basically a spiritual enlightenment to phytoplankton and the science behind the important role that they form in sequestering carbon, producing oxygen, and helping to create the rain. About half of the rain that falls on the east coast of Australia is actually produced by phytoplankton. Are we still on time, Andrew? Yeah. Another awakening program we're planning is called Veda Bubbles, which is like a 30-minute audio file that you'll listen to in the bath. And another one, again, is a more advanced version of that, which will be conducted in a specially modified float tank. So we try to take away all of the sensory inputs except for the eyes and the ears in order to more precisely be able to convey our message. And then Vita Vantage, which we've sort of started to flesh out already, is an 8-part, half-hour YouTube videos, which basically direct a program of activities that one would undertake over the period of 5 weeks, over the period of 2 full moons. So in the first full moon, you would sit in quiet contemplation, and in the second full moon, after the program has run its course, you would invite a bunch of people around for a full moon party where you would share the message. And if we're successful in fostering a cacophony through this program, which is what all of these things are designed to do, and if through sharing to your peers at the second moon party, you could enroll 2 people, for every 1 person that does the program, enroll 2 people, it's like an R naught of 2, then you could have your 53 million people around the world go through this spiritual enlightenment program within the space of 18 months to 2 years. It's just the basic mathematics, I think. So that's broadly speaking the structural or the actions that we're looking to try and take in terms of trying to share the message. So it's not just the message, it's about finding ways for people to develop a spiritual affection for nature. That's the big mission that we're trying to do. So now, fundamental to all of this is to try and get our heads around spirituality. Now, when I talk to a lot of people about spirituality, some people don't actually want to talk about the subject of spirituality because they hold this view that goes by the name of woo-woo. And woo-woo is this idea that spirituality is not something that can be discussed. It's sort of like they think that a spirituality is something that's nebulous or exists in another plane and shouldn't really be analyzed. Well, from somebody who sees the power of spirituality in action, it's necessary to understand what's actually going on. And so, and generally speaking in the West, there's a very low level of spiritual literacy. And what I mean by that is that people don't understand the subject of spirituality. So my research through my master's has tried to dive down into that murky space and trying to find some patterns. One pattern that is not to be found was a definition of spirituality that was agreed to across all of the different researchers, because depending on how you view spirituality, there's different definitions. So we've abandoned the idea of trying to define it and instead see it as an umbrella concept that covers a whole bunch of themes. And so the 5 core themes that I've drawn out are on the screen here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through them and explain what each of the themes and the sub-themes means. And the idea is then, with respect to the workshop, that participants would be able to get hold of the little worksheet, which is here, which will be available on the website shortly and elsewhere. And they're able to then address how they view each of these themes and sub-themes with respect to their own hearts. Now, I'm not looking to pry into people's hearts to find out what they think. This is a purely voluntary thing for those people who think there is some value in making an inquiry into oneself with respect to this framework. Again, this is not an absolute truth. This is simply a frame of reference by which we can try and tease out some answers to a complicated space. So the golden rule is the number 1. There's actually a book of the name, The Golden Rule, written by a chap who traveled around the world, and he went and talked to all of these different spiritual leaders and inquired upon them what was the overarching rule that was defining of their religions. And what he found was that all the major religions around the world effectively had the same golden rule. It was worded differently, but the statement was the same. In the English Bible, the King James Bible, I think the phrase is, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Okay, so the question is for the audience who want to partake in this adventure would be to write down what is your golden rule. And what we're going to do later on is we're going to compare your personal answers to these questions, okay, with how Vita sees a proper answer to these questions. This is not about a right or wrong answer. This is simply into an inquiry into how people think. So the second of the rules is, the themes is life's big questions. And so there's actually a whole suite of these, but the top 3 are, for example, where did we come from? Where did the humans come from? What is our origins? Why are we here? Why are there humans on the planet? Is there something that we ought to be doing given that we are here? And what happens when we die, which is probably one of the biggest questions that spiritual philosophies and religions try to answer, is the afterlife issue. Number 3 of the themes is peak experience. And this is something that is commonly found in the literature around spirituality, is that relating to those times when you are sort of liberated from your day-to-day existence. You have this moments of exaltation, of awe and distraction and timelessness, which means that you lose track of time. and flow, which is connected to that. So you can imagine somebody who's playing tennis competitively for the duration that that game is playing. They're effectively meditating on tennis and they lose track of time. My friend Greg over here tells me that he goes into flow when he's gardening. He starts pottering around in his garden. Next thing you know, oh, it's dark. Okay, so we've got three subcategories: awe, wonder, and amazement. So what are the things that cause you awe, cause you wonder, cause you amazement? What are those things? And then emotional state, what does that mean? Let me just go back down to my emotional state refers to how we respond to stimuli. What are things that trigger us? For example, what things make you angry? What things make you happy? What things make you sad? This, I'm in trouble with this. It only seems to take the PowerPoint in one direction. I can't go back.
Oh, okay. You can't go. Oh,
No, so I'll come out of it and then, sorry about this, just a bit of technical stuff. Actually, what I might do, I might just leave it up like that. Okay, that's fine. No, we don't need to, do we need to do that? Will it show on the screen without going full screen?
oh
Yeah, it does.
it'll
Okay.
Show up like that.
No, that's fine. That's actually fine that way because I have more control over it. Okay, sorry about that. Translation, Veda hypothesis, Veda themes, golden rulers. Okay, peak experience. Okay, emotional state, the things that drive your emotional state: anger, love, fury, concern. So what we're interested in is what are those things that motivate you to have this outburst of emotion, whether it's positive or negative, right? And then, of course, timelessness and flow. So for me, I fall into timelessness. I fall into flow, which leads to timelessness. When I'm writing, I live in Brisbane and I've done a lot of riding around on the City Cat, which is the ferry, and I can jump on the City Cat and I can lose hours and hours and just sitting there churning away writing. That's my personal story there. And then number 4 of the key themes is the inner self. And so again, this is something that comes up a lot in the literature on spirituality, as ideas of the inner self. And one thing that I observe in Western spirituality, so let me just step aside for a moment and create a frame of reference. Since around prior to 1900, spirituality in the West was pretty much the domain of the Christian church. If you wanted to do spiritual stuff, you went to the church. The church answered all of the big questions that are laid down here. The church told you where we came from, what we're doing here, and what happens when we die. The church defined the golden rule. The church framed peak experience. It offered through its cathedrals this amazing experience of the choirs and the organs playing in the big halls and the sunshine coming through the stained glass windows and so forth. But since around 1900, with the separation of the church and state, with the internationalization of trade and the ability for people to bring spiritual concepts to the West from all over the world and to invent some new ones, we have what's now referred to as the spiritual marketplace, which I prefer to refer to as a spiritual smorgasbord, where when you inquire into people's spirituality, what you tend to find is there's like a hodgepodge of different ideas that they choose from the marketplace, in the way that somebody goes to a smorgasbord and chooses what they put on their plate. Some people have all of one thing, where other people have a little bit of different things. The fundamental problem with that, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that spiritual view that Western people have. The problem from the perspective of the climate and ecological crisis is that apart from a few fleeting references, there's practically nothing written in those spiritual marketplace which can positively help us deal with the climate and ecological crisis, which is threatening to eradicate most life on Earth. So if there is a possibility that spirituality can be finessed or fine-tuned to be a tool or an agent of positive change, then we need to start having a little bit of discipline, and part of that discipline is to actually have the discipline of understanding the subject of spirituality. So much of Western spirituality is focused on the individual. And so, for example, a lot of the the practices are about helping individual people live better lives. And what we're trying to do, and we're acknowledging that in this statement here, but of course, what we're also trying to do is to try and broaden that concept out into what we refer to as the ecological self. So on one hand, we've got the inner self, where we consider our self-realization of who we are, who are we individually, the answer to the question, who are you? So that's about you as an individual and your personality and the choices that you make around what you wear and what you do, your hobbies and your likes and dislikes. Okay, but there's another concept, and I've borrowed this from a Norwegian philosopher called NENA, whose work is called ecosophy, ecological philosophy. And he refers to the ecological self. The ecological self is the idea of seeing ourselves, our individual selves, as part of the global ecosystem, part of the whole. And so if you imagine the concept of Vita Planeta, the idea that the planet is a single organism of which we are cells, ecological self is understanding ourselves, the cell, in the context of the whole. And then there's a term called self-actualization, which is a term that Ananias uses, but I've sort of poached it and twisted it around a little bit. And what I refer to as self-actualization in this context is our ability to actually affect change with respect to our ecological self. So, for example, if we come to realize that the ecosystem is collapsing a lot faster than we thought it was, what capacity have we got individually to actually step up and take action that is commensurate to the scale and scope of the problem that needs to be fixed? Sacred values is the fifth of the 5 themes. And broadly speaking, we've got the 3 subcategories of right and wrong. So right and wrong is those things that are frowned upon or commended. I've got a little analogy to make. You imagine you're down on a weekend, Saturday afternoon at the pub by the beach. There's a road in front of the beach, and the wind comes up and somebody's hat blows off, and one of your crew leaps over the fence, runs into the traffic, nearly gets bowled over by a truck, but nonetheless manages to rescue the hat, comes back to his crew. Second scenario, same situation, but instead of it being a hat that fell into the traffic, it's now a pram with a child in it. Somebody leaps over the fence, rushes into the traffic, nearly gets bowled over, rescues the baby. 2 different responses from the audience. The guy that rushed into the traffic and nearly got killed to rescue a hat, he doesn't get any beer. Whereas the guy that rescued the baby is all of a sudden a hero. These things are framed by what is right and wrong. That's what we're trying to address there. The next thing is this concept of sacred and profane, which is sort of a similar thing, but it's a broader version. And sacred is really those things that one would make a costly sacrifice to protect. So in this instance, the guy saw that the child's life being in danger, that was sacred. He was prepared to take a costly sacrifice. Now, did the guy that chased the hat see the hat as sacred? Probably not. He was probably just being a bit of a ninny. Okay. In Japan, they have, I don't know if you've been to Japan or seen photographs of Japan, but dotted around Japan, they have these red archways called torii. And the torii is a symbol that says that what lies beyond has kami, and kami is like a spirit, that's the best way to describe it, that is invested in a temple or a waterfall or a grove of trees, and the kami are regarded as sacred. And so the torii, the red archway, represents the pathway to something that is sacred, and it is a signal to the public that when you go beyond the pathway or beyond the entrance, that different rules apply. So if you're going to go into a jinja, which is one of the Shinto temples, then that's not a place to let the kids run around screaming. That's a place where you perform certain rituals as per the rules of the place. In Australia, I'll give you a little story. A few months ago, I was up in Dorrigo National Park. Is that the name of it, behind Bellingen? Yeah. And there was a sign there that said that there was a walk down to a waterfall. And I thought, what a great idea. I'm going to walk to the waterfall, spend some time in quiet contemplation. Well, that didn't happen because the waterfall was the most rowdy and boisterous and noisy place in the entire forest, because there was a whole bunch of people there were shouting and yelling and taking photographs and making the right racket. So there's something missing in that conversation about signaling, or the idea that certain places in the environment can be regarded as sacred. The Japanese understand that through Shinto, but that's not something that's necessarily well recognized in Australian culture. So we've got a program. One of our plans at the moment is to create a sort of what we're calling a Vitori, which is a Vitantori, which is basically an archway which will be put in place to sort of indicate that what lies beyond has sacred values. For example, things like waterfalls and special ecological places. Finally, in sacred values, I have a concept called Biosphere Integrity. Now, Biosphere Integrity is a term that you'll hear through studies into planetary boundaries. Planetary boundaries are the idea that there is certain fault lines on Earth that, if are broken, leads to the uninhabitability of the planet. And biosphere integrity has got two characteristics, one of which is functional and genetic diversity, which is all complicated stuff. But it basically means you've got to have a certain amount of the right types of living things on the planet in order for the system to maintain its ability to continue going forward. So given that biosphere integrity is of fundamental importance to humans because the biosphere is our life support system, then a fundamental sacred value that we ought to have is to be able to recognize the existence of biosphere integrity and to see it as sacred, and to take costly sacrifices necessary in order to protect biosphere integrity in those instances where it is being destroyed through, for example, the process that's referred to as ecocide. And so what we're trying to do with Veda is we're trying to understand the subject of spirituality and trying to frame spirituality in a manner that helps us use this powerful tool to get through the crisis of the Anthropocene into the Verdant Age, where we can all take a bit of a break. Okay, how are we going for time? Because I've got to the end of that section.
It's past 12.
Okay, so how's that with respect to our
Where
11:40? So we've got 20 minutes.
I'm sorry,
12:40. Right. So now this is the bit where the audience was going to be scribbling furiously. Okay. You want to watch that?
no, the young boy picture online.
The one? Huh?
The picture online audience.
Yeah. So what we could do is we could have, now how do we get the questions? Okay, Carrie, Kira, Michelle, and Andrew. Carrie, are you there? Karun and Andrew. Which is what we might ask them to do. Yeah, okay, Carrie and Kira, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, that's you. Okay, so Carrie's here. Okay, so what I'm wondering is, what do we do, given that we don't have much of an audience, with respect to the idea of filling in the blanks? And if we've only got, 20 minutes left, so what I might do is we might skip that part and then just go on to the part where I talk about, address the themes with respect to Vita. Is that right?
Yep. Does anyone, maybe if anyone has any questions?
Yeah.
Well?
Does anybody want to throw in a comment or a question, or just, interact with this conversation, or are you happy for me just to continue talking? Because I know what to say. Let's just say. No, keep going. Okay, I got my imprimatur. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my sheet. No, that's all right. I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to close that down. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go back to the 5 themes and the sub-themes, and I want to...
Sorry, I just need to share that screen.
Okay, yeah.
So it's, I just need to stop sharing this one first. And then, where was that? This one?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so with respect to the golden rule, the idea of the questionnaire, this thing here, was that people would write down an answer to the question, what is your golden rule? And then they'd write an answer to the question, where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? So each of these statements that I've made with regards to the 5 themes have been turned into questions. And the idea was to use this questionnaire to sort of do a map or a baseline assessment of how an individual's spirituality is shaped. Okay. The idea then was not to say that whatever was written on that sheet was either right or wrong. It was simply just a snapshot of how they were spiritually framed at the time. And then the idea was to come back and then look at the 5 themes and the sub-themes and just address how one might frame those ideas to maximize the chance of individuals being a powerful participant in the challenges of dealing with the Anthropocene crisis and getting into the Verdant Age. So what I'll do is I'll read out now what I've written down as what I understand to be the best. Now, again, this is early stage stuff, so what's written here is probably good, imperfect, but good. So let me just get on with it anyway. So the golden rule, the central guiding statement that frames all else, the world's major religions share the common golden rule, which is do unto them as you do unto others, you would have them do unto you. The problem with that golden rule fundamentally is it doesn't have any reference to the planet in it. It simply looks after the interests of the public without recognizing the need for the planet to be looked after. And you sort of understand that in a way because most of the world's religions were founded well before, thousands of years ago, well before the scientific revolution, and even something like Baha'i, which was founded around 1850, preceded a modern understanding of ecology, which I think has a golden rule like that as well. So fundamentally, Vita's golden rule is to do unto others and the living planet as you would have them do unto you. I think that just makes intuitive sense. As for where did we come from? So Veda is a science-based spiritual philosophy. So the answer of where did the humans come from is ultimately answered by talking to cosmologists and biologists who the best understanding to this point is a phenomenon called the Big Bang around 13 billion years ago, led to the creation of the Earth around 4.5 billion years ago. Around 3.8 billion years ago, a process called abiogenesis is where living organisms were created out of non-living matter as a matter of natural process. And then the evolutionary process continued from then. And around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens sapien came onto the scene through the evolutionary process. And that effectively is the origins of the human race. As for why are we here, which is a pretty profound philosophical question, we're here for the same reasons as the trees and the bees and the whales and the snails, which is to go about, pursue our personal interests in a manner that contributes to the well-being of the whole. That's effectively what every other living organism does. And given that we came from the same place, it's implicit that that's fundamentally what our role on the planet is. Veda does not view humans as being some sort of a nasty parasite. We're simply an organism that is not doing its job. What happens when we die? So Veda believes that when we die, the minerals that make up our body break down and are absorbed into the biochemical flux of the soil and the atmosphere and the ocean, and that those minerals can then be taken up by other living organisms, a process that we refer to as revitalization. It's sort of a spin on reincarnation, and it's a spin on reincarnation that meets scientifically understood phenomena of how the world works and how minerals are shared around ecosystems. And then, of course, and all of this takes place within the biosphere, and then if there is such a thing as the soul, and this is something that we don't have a firm opinion on, then it exists within the biosphere. And the question of, for example, is there a God, is not something that we hold an opinion on. However, we hold that the concept is unnecessary for a person to have a happy and productive life with no fear of death. With respect to the inner self, individuality, our individuality can be tuned to assist us to advance the Verdant Age. So this is a phrase that we use in Veda. If our aspiration is to get through the Anthropocene crisis with the humans alive, if we're to not go extinct, to get into a phase where we can operate synergistically with nature, then what we need to be doing in the meantime is trying to advance the Verdant Age. So this is a fundamental driver of the Veda philosophy, is that everything we do in our lives should be focused towards that, given that the crisis is now so acute. So our individuality can be tuned to assist to advance the Verdant Age. For example, if you are vengeful as a human being, if that's part of your personality, seek revenge for ecocide. If you are patient, then share your patience with those who need it to help advance the Verdant Age. Know yourself so that you might be able to better contribute to this task, right? With respect to the ecological self, see yourself as a part of the living planet and understand how your influence helps to advance the Verdant Age. Understand yourself as a conduit for the respiratory byproducts of phytoplankton, and that what you exhale becomes the building blocks for plant life. So you understand yourself as part of an ecosystem, part of a body with minerals running through you and coming from other organisms. And with respect to self-actualization, a pathway to becoming more effective at influencing the biosphere to advance the Verdant Age. And part of this is fostering behavior that is consistent with the scale and the scope of the problem being addressed. So when the house is burning down, running up to it with a single bucket to put it out is doing something to stop the house burning down, but it's not consistent with the scope and the scale of the problem. And it's important that if we're going to fix this mess and we want to participate in the journey, that we need to be participating using the tools that are actually suited to the task. With response to awe, wonder and amazement, seek awe, wonder and amazement from nature. For example, sunrises, sunset, moonrises, running water and rivers, waterfalls, ocean waves, nature documentaries. Find your amazement in your life through nature. For emotional state, seek that your extremes of emotion are tied to the well-being of the biosphere. For example, rather than getting angry at having bad table service, direct your anger at deforestation. Rather than feeling joy and elation at hooking a fish, feel that emotion when a fish escapes a hook. Seek peak experiences in nature. If you have a hankering for noise and danger, seek it from waves crashing on the rocks in a storm, as opposed to drag races or first-person shooter video games. With respect to timelessness and flow, rather than falling into flow watching your undies in a tumble dryer, which happens to me quite frequently every couple of weeks, seek flow from nature, for example, by sitting in quiet contemplation by a waterfall or stream. Finding flow in tennis does not anchor you spiritually to nature like the flow that comes from walking in the forest. If you fall into flow reading novels about romance and adventure, you might also fall into flow reading novels that help advance your understanding of the Earth system instead. Sacred values, right and wrong. In very simple terms, actions that harm people in the biosphere, remember our golden rule, are wrong, and actions that help advance the Verdant Age are right. These are right and wrong, and we ought to these are rights and wrongs that we ought to be attentive to. Sacred and profane. Places of ecological significance are sacred as are acts of personal sacrifice on behalf of them. The Japanese Shinto religion uses the red archway called the torii to denote that what lies beyond a waterfall, a temple or a grove, for example, has sacred values and ought to be treated accordingly. Western people ought to see nature as sacred and act accordingly. Biosphere integrity, a fundamental sacred value is the integrity of the biosphere, as this is the life support system for our civilization. This is to say that the integrity of the biosphere, the functioning of the global life support system, is sacred, and one ought to make efforts to protect it. Thus, omnicide, the deliberate human actions that destroy swathes of ecosystems, is the breach of the most sacred of values. The perpetuation of the fossil fuel industry is omnicide, and thus a breach of Vita's sacred values. Furthermore, as all wildlife is sacred, the more endangered a species becomes, the more sacred it ought to become, and thus the greater efforts one ought to make to save it. Now, if wildlife is sacred, does that mean that I can't go fishing or cut down a tree? It doesn't mean that, but it means that you should not overfish or act carelessly and leave fish hooks in pelicans, for example. You can cut a tree, but don't cut the forest. What is important is ecological integrity, not the individual organism. The takeaway from all of this is to attune your spirituality to nature and seek a deeper understanding of how nature works so that you might be more inclined and informed in your actions and inactions. Okay. Well, that's pretty much most of what I was going to cover. What are we up to? 32. We've got 8 minutes. How about we run these little videos? Can we do that? Okay, what we're going to do, because we've got 8 minutes left and I've got about 3 minutes of content, I'm going to do 5 minutes of video. So can you grab, so the URL is there. There, see?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so if you can grab that one and then run that one and then run the other one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 2 little pieces of video from a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still, which this is the 2012 version with Keanu Reeves. The story, The Day the Earth Stood Still, was originally written as a novella back in the 40s called Farewell to the Master, and there was a 1951 movie. In this particular movie, they've adapted the original theme to have the spaceman Klaatu, played by Keanu Reeves, is coming down on a mission to save the planet, and here he's having a conversation with a woman that he's teamed up with who has sort of misinterpreted his mission. That's right. Every now and then in Hollywood, you actually find some pretty interesting sort of Earth-related themes.
This planet has died.
And then I'll just
Yep.
start it again.
Yep. Full volume.
Yeah, and let's go volume, where is that?
No, that's volume there. That's full.
Volume?
Okay, let's see if this works.
I need to know what's happening.
This planet has died. The human race is killed.
So you've come here to help us.
No, I didn't.
You said you came to save us.
I said I came to save the Earth.
You came to save the Earth. From us. You came to save the Earth. From us.
I can't risk the survival of this planet for the sake of one species.
What are you saying?
If the Earth dies, you die. If you die, the Earth survives. There are only a handful of planets in the cosmos that are capable of supporting complex
You
life.
can't do this.
This one can't be allowed to perish.
We can change. We could still turn things
We've
around.
watched, we've waited and hoped that you would change.
Please.
It's reached the tipping point. We have to act.
Please.
We'll undo the damage you've done and give the Earth a chance to begin again.
Please. We could change. We could change.
The decision is made. The process has begun.
Okay. All right, and if you can run the other one. Okay, so it's interesting, the subtitles weren't actually related particularly well to what was being said, but Keanu Reeves was basically saying that he had come to Earth to save the planet from the humans. And in the story, there's this monster called, this robot called Gort, who subsequently, they take all of the living things off the planet and then Gort basically destroys everything. But before that happens, so this is the next video there, that's the URL.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, now this is another scene from a movie where Klaatu, the spaceman, goes and talks to a professor, played by John Cleese, where the professor pleads for clemency. Yep.
So,
You can just leave it like that, it doesn't have to be full screen.
okay.
Oh, you got to
Yes.
go back in again. Yeah. Tricky stuff, eh?
Yes, it is. Different here.
Yep.
No.
No. How long? Yeah, that is still. Okay.
I have so many questions to ask you.
It's Bob.
It's beautiful. So we're not so different after all. I wish that were true. There must be alternatives. You must have some technology that could solve our problem.
Your problem is not technology. The problem is you. You lack the will to change.
Then help us change.
I cannot change your nature. You treat the world as you treat each other.
But every civilization reaches a crisis point eventually.
Most of them don't make it.
Yours did. How?
Our sun was dying. We had to evolve in order to survive.
So it was only when your world was threatened with destruction that you became what you are now.
Yes.
Well, that's where we are. You say we're on the brink of destruction, and you're right. But it's only on the brink that people find the will to change. Only at the precipice do we evolve. This is our moment. Don't take it from us. We're close to an answer.
All right. So we just go back to the slide deck, just one more slide, and then we'll close up.
If you stay, you'll die.
I know.
So it's a slide deck.
This is my home now.
Tricky stuff. Yeah, close that up. Keep talking over me. Keanu Reeves, don't talk over me, please. Okay. And back to the slide deck there. And then go to that slide. Okay, right. 1 minute left. Thank you, folks. That was the presentation that I wanted to deliver. Slightly different to the one I wanted to deliver, but basically we got the information out there. Shortly, there will be the questionnaire on the website. So if you wanted to participate in the actual interactive part, that will be available shortly. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is to just address that we have a short book that is available through the website. It's called Vita Awakening. It's actually the 5th of our little awakening programs. The book, it takes about an hour to read, and it covers off on some climate and ecological science to sort of frame the crisis that we're at, the Anthropocene crisis, and then talks about how we can use spirituality to address that. And then it outlines Vita Spirituality, the 5 themes at the end of it. It's available as a free ebook on the website, which is thinkvita.org. If you're watching this and you want to use a QR code, there's a QR code right there. If not, then there is the web address. It's also available as a paperback and as a Kindle ebook. And what we invite you to do, if you're interested in Vita and want to know more, then would you go onto the website, thinkvita.org, join the newsletter. We don't send out a lot of newsletters, 2 in the last 5 years actually, but we'll be upping the tempo a little bit when we've got something important to say. Have a read of the book, pass it on or recommend it on or share your views on it, and have a look around the website to get a broader sense of what it is that we're working on. And thank you very much for your attendance, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.